This PowerPoint is to help you with the basics of MLA documentation in Composition 1. The first question we have to ask is why we are learning documentation. The number one reason in college is to help you avoid plagiarism. Another reason is because we want to add to your credibility as a writer. This is called ethos. It's part of persuasion most of the time when we discuss it. But basically it just means how does the reader know you are a credible or trustworthy author. Additionally, it does also show your research variety, how much research you've done. It shows you where to learn more about a specific fact or piece of information. So let's say you include a statistic. We want to know where that statistic came from. Documentation helps us to see that. Additionally, you will be able to show a reader where to learn more about an expert's opinion or where a quotation came from. And finally, it just shows us where to find a source in general, and also how you found that source to begin with, whether it was on the internet or in print, etc. Why are we using MLA style is another question students might ask. Students are often confused because other classes will have them using Chicago style or APA style or a different form of documentation altogether. We use MLA in this class because it is the standard for liberal arts classes. These will be all of your classes, often history, English, languages, things like that, use MLA. MLA is sort of the original form of documentation that was created, so most other styles are use MLA and sort of branch off from it, which means if you use MLA, the theory is that you can understand other forms of documentation as well. Any documentation style represents a consensus between instructors, scholars, librarians, and students. So if you were to go up to an instructor or librarian with a source cited in MLA, he or she should be able to find it quite easily. And finally, we use MLA because in MLA the emphasis is placed on the scholars and research done for the essay, not necessarily other things like years the source was published, which is something the APA style emphasizes. There are three parts to MLA which we will discuss today: the works cited page, in-text citations, and signal phrases or attributive tags. And these are the page numbers down here that you can take a look at in your textbooks. To start off with, we're going to talk about the works cited page. This is a list of sources that are used or cited in your essay. Each source that you have in your essay has its own entry on the works cited page. So if you use 3 sources in your essay, you will have 3 entries on your works cited page. The works cited page needs to be alphabetized. It needs to use hanging indentation, which is the opposite of paragraph indentation, where the second and third line and so forth is indented, but not the first. It should be double spaced. It also needs to go with the final draft, so it will be the last page of your essay. You can either create your works cited page as a separate file, or you can create it with your essay, but it needs to go with every draft of your essay. You do not use bullet points or numbers, and most importantly, and many students do this incorrectly, you need to complete this while you are writing your essay or beforehand and not after, because it's difficult to move on to the next stage of documentation if you don't have your works cited page done. Here's an example of a works cited entry, and this is a typical web entry. So notice we have the author's name first. We start with his last name, and the reason we want to do that is because we want to be able to alphabetize this easier, so his name is inverted. The next thing we have is the article title. The article title, if you notice, is in quotation marks. One of the things you will need to learn is which title is what title and how to format it. All article titles or small work titles are in quotation marks. A large work title, such as the website title, as you can see here, is in italics. The website title will be the large title at the top of the page, whereas the article title will typically be smaller. The website title, as you can see in this example, has a .com. Now the .com is not the same as the URL. In this case, it's actually part of the title. The URL would be the http colon backslash backslash www dot etc. In this case, it's part of the title, but it would be part of the large words at the top of the page, not part of the URL necessarily. The next thing we have here is your publisher. Every website will have either a publisher listed, or you will have to put NP for no publisher. Typically this information is with the copyright date at the bottom. This next thing here is the date that it was created, and your creation date, if you can't find one, should be ND, and again this is typically with the copyright information. Because we found it on the internet, we need the word web. So any source you find on the internet will have web. If it's not on the internet, most likely it's print. If you printed something from the internet, it's still a web source. And then last but not least, we have the date of access. And this is specific for web sources because if you don't tell us when you accessed it and we go to the same web page and the information is not there, then we might know, oh, you accessed it 3 weeks ago, so it's not there anymore. The next stage of documentation are in-text citations. In-text citations are used for 3 major purposes: quotations, paraphrases or individual facts, and summaries. We're definitely going to focus on quotes and paraphrases in this unit. The first thing you want to know about in-text citations is the purpose of them is to lead the reader directly to the source on the works cited page. So it is a quick reference to the source on the works cited page. You always use the first part of the source's works cited entry and a page number if you have one. An example here, we have white, which would be the first part of the works cited entry because it's a last name and a page number. Or if you have no author, then you might end up with part of a title. They are placed at the end of the sentence. They're always at the end of the sentence, and they go in parentheses. So you'll want to remember in-text citations in parentheses. You might have heard them called parenthetical citations for that reason. Signal phrases is our last subject, and a signal phrase is basically an in-text citation without a parentheses. And this is how your book sets it up for you. When you're referencing a source, you either have the option to put the reference in parentheses or in the sentence itself. You don't need both. You might use a signal phrase, for example, to reference a well-known author. You might use it to reference a well-known sponsor or title, such as a newspaper title. And we use signal phrases most often with quotations because you want to avoid what's called a hanging quotation, where the quotation just sits there in the sentence and doesn't do a whole lot for you. It's not connected in any way. We use a signal phrase then for a smoother transition between your words and the words of someone else. Most often the signal phrase will be something like according to Dr. John Smith, and then the information from that source is included, so it's a smoother transition of information. The signal phrase can either take the place of or supplement an in-text citation, and I'll give you an example of this. So here are a couple of examples. You notice down here we have our source that's on the works cited page. This first example here, however, according to journalist and professional Laura DeAndrea Tyson, quote, there are much bigger problems, etc. Notice that we've got Laura DeAndrea Tyson's name written out, and so this means that we do not need to include an in-text citation at the end because it leads us directly to the source on the works cited page. Now, if we wrote instead an intriguing article in the New York Times further explains this argument, we would have to include Tyson at the end because we have not included it in the sentence. So Tyson has to be in there somewhere so that we can reference the correct source on the works cited page. Let me show you what the website itself looks like. So this is her article on the New York Times website. To find the title of the website, typically you want to look up at the top. Remember, it's not this URL up here. Here is the article title. Some sources will have one and some sources won't. We found our author here. This is the date it was uploaded, so that would be our date that we would need. And then typically you'll scroll down to the bottom and you'll find some copyright information, and that's typically the sponsor of the website. So that is MLA documentation in a nutshell. Obviously the readings in your textbook are very important to go through and keep that rules for writers handy so that you can keep referring back to it in the future.